So what is social studies in basic terms? We do this in American History 1, but social studies is a discipline that teaches you about the world cultures, world history, and in this course you're learning about early U.S. history, American history. So what is history? These on the first page are all important terms you need to know. History is the study of the past. So what is a historian? It says here they collect, evaluate, and interpret the evidence. Basically what this means is think about a research paper when you're going to gather all the information you need for your research paper. That's collecting evidence. And that's what historians do. We get as many different perspectives as we can on a situation or an event. Evaluation, guys, that's just simply reading that evidence. And interpreting the evidence, that is writing a research paper and really coming to your conclusion. The conclusion part of your research paper is what you've learned out of all of it. It's basically putting all the evidence together. So what is a bias? A bias is a preference or an inclination that inhibits a person from making an objective decision. How do you as a historian want to think? You want to think objectively. You do not want to have a bias. You want to have what is called an unbiased opinion or an objective opinion, because that will give you an objective decision. And that's what we want with history. So what is a perspective? It is a point of view. It would be thinking about a fight or an event you're involved with, and it would be your take on it. Who started what, how it went down, that sort of thing. That's what a perspective is. It's a point of view. So think of it like in world wars. Think of it as each country had a different perspective as to why they fought the war, which is usually how that works out. Primary source. These are writings or artifacts by people who actually lived through a historical event. Think of it as they were there. A primary source would be something like a diary, would be something like an autobiography. It would be something written by somebody who was there. Think of Anne Frank. You guys have probably read her. Think about any autobiography written by the person, written by a person who lived through an event or their life. So they actually were at the event, they lived through it, and they wrote it down, or they recorded it on audio. A secondary source, these would be writings by people who were not present at the historical event, but they lived after the event, or they wrote about it through a primary source. This would be something like a biography. This would be something like a historical book where you gather different primary sources. So these guys, secondary sources, are a lot of what we read, and it's kind of cleaned up a little bit from the primary source. So, and it's remember a secondary source tries to add in a bunch of different perspectives. So let's see here. All right, so different sources to learn from. As you see, visual. You can see things literary. You can read things music. You can sing and hear things in the lyrics. Perspectives. There are many different types of perspectives and viewpoints. Like I said on the last slide, think about a fight in class. Your perspective on it. It's important to pull from as many different perspectives when studying history to obtain a complete overview of the event. To be able to do this and to come to an objective conclusion. So guys, a lot of these major events we're going to talk about, historians have taken from many different perspectives. And you need to. That's what gives us an objective. That's what gives us objective thinking, and that's how we need to be in our life. So, the 3 C's and an S when evaluating a primary and secondary source. You need to think of sourcing, who made the source, where did it come from, contextualizing. Think of the time period and the setting in which the event took place. corroborating, in other words, what do other sources say about this event or artifact, and close reading. What does the document say? Is it biased? What is the tone, and what is their perspective? So when you're reading historical sources, you should be thinking about these 4 things in some form or fashion. That would help you, because some books are written with a heavy bias. So what are historical facts? As you see, the thing you're going to see on your quiz, or thing you're going to need to know is about a historical fact, is basically what happened. Names and dates. Very boring. It only answers the very basic question of what happened, who was involved, and when it occurred. In other words, names and dates. So this stuff is what you're going to be bored with, more than likely, unless you're a names and dates type of person. So this isn't the fun part of history for me, even though I am good with names and dates, or I used to be. The fun part is the interpretation. The fun part is trying to understand why the historical event happened. It brings an understanding to the event, and it tries to explain it, why something happened. Kind of like Pearl Harbor, if you think about it. I always use this one as an example. It's pretty easy. You know, December 7th at 8:30 in the morning, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. You know, so there you go. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. So that's historical fact. What's the interpretation? Why would the Japanese do something like this? The interpretation is a lot more interesting in that we supplied them with 80% of their oil, and we cut that off. We supplied them with most of their steel, and we cut that off. And they were bound and determined to extend their empire, and they needed these raw materials. They needed oil, they needed steel, and they wanted to continue to build their empire. So we were the police force in the Pacific Ocean. So they knew if they got rid of the police force, they could continue on about their expansionist ways. And keep in mind, they attacked Pearl Harbor, but they also attacked every single American outpost in the Pacific. The Philippines, all of them. So this was a massive, massive attack. And they did this to knock the police force of the Pacific out, and they figured if they wiped this out, we would not join the war effort. However, the guy who developed the plan to attack Pearl Harbor, Yamamoto, he actually told him that they could awaken a sleeping giant, and if the Japanese didn't knock the U.S. out completely, we would enter the war and we'd crush Japan, because he knew we were a sleeping giant as far as industry, motivation, and our population, because he had studied over here. He actually went to University of Southern California, USC, to get his master's degree, so he knew a little bit about us. But anyway, that's what I'm saying. The interpretation is a lot more interesting than just a fact. So skills needed to find out what a primary source or secondary source is. Just remember these 3 things to help you out. Who, when, and where. Who wrote the document, when was it written, and where was it written. So why use this stuff? As you see, helps place events in chronological order. Why use timelines? It helps place things in chronological order, and it helps understand the cause, course, and consequence of events. So you need to know this page, because cause and effects, I use the 3 C's: cause, course, and consequence. You'll see this throughout the semester. What is the cause of an event? Give me some things that happened and names during the event, like during a war. You can give me battles, you can give me inventions, you can give me names, and then you got to list consequences. What were the consequences of this event? So these are important things. You'll see this throughout the semester in your activities and how I cover the information. So here are the 5 C's of historical thinking: change over time, context, cause and effect, causality, contingency or interconnectivity of things. If you change one thing, the outcome may be different. It allows you to come up with counterfactuals, kind of like if Kennedy would have lived, if Lincoln would have lived, those kind of things, and complexity. So, by understanding the past, it helps us learn from the achievements and mistakes. We often say don't repeat history, or we look at it and we say we learn from our mistakes, but guys, you also need to think of it this way. We need to learn from our achievements. What do we get right and how do we keep doing it? To understand why things are the way they are today, you need to understand these mistakes and achievements of the past. You don't just live in a vacuum. There are reasons why nations in this world do not like us. And if you go back and do the history on it, you probably find out we're meddling in their business in the early 20th century, some form, some fashion. Or late 19th, kind of like Hawaii. But it gives us a basis to make a hypothesis about the future. So, why is social studies important? As you see, you're living in a smaller and smaller world due to technological improvements and transportation improvements. In short, the world's smaller, and as you see, the events are changing and shaping our present and our future. So here are some themes. There you go, the major themes of American History 1 you need to know for your quiz or your test. Here we go. Interpreting. Whoa, what do we do here? Okay, so it fast forwarded on me. Interpreting, creating timelines, fact versus interpretation, evaluation of sources for credibility, political cartoon, primary sources, secondary sources, artifacts, social studies, themes and context or concepts, and turning points. These are all important concepts you'll find in history. Geography and environmental literacy, as you see, human-environment interactions, push-pull factors, which means what pushes people someplace, what pulls people to someplace, and map skills. Economic and financial, natural resources, human capital, financial capital, and social classes. So, things fast forwarding on me again. So, civics and government, democracy, government, feudalism, monarchy, republic, politics, liberalism, conservatism, totalitarianism, government regulation. These are all concepts related to civics and government. Culture, art, music, oral history, which is spoken history, archaeology, anthropology, religion, and belief systems, gender roles, and cultural diffusion means people moving and sharing ideas on a large scale. So this is something you need for your test as well. So make sure you get this. These are 5 of the problems in social studies throughout our civilizations, world civilizations, and U.S. So you need to know what this is a map of. Think about it. What do you think? There you go. Colonial trade routes of the mid-1700s. It's the triangular trade map. So that concludes this section of notes.